So, I hope you enjoyed that and it left you wanting more. You can find my novel Dead Night on Amazon in paperback, as well as Kindle and audiobook. And if you want to learn more about Cybele and her world, you can visit my website. Over the past few weeks, we've actually been working on a massive update on that. It's got a new layout, it's much easier to read, and I've been working on a lot of new exclusive content that you can go on there and explore a little more of what happens afterwards and things like that. So I'll put the links in the description below and you can go and check those out in your own time. So I'm going to do one last reading and delve into some slightly newer territory. As you may know from my constant promising that I'm doing it, I've been working on the second book in the Dead Night series, which is called Heart of Night. And I'm going to read you a little extract from my draft. You're just going to have to bear with me a little bit because this is a draft, it's not the final version. So when I do eventually release the book, it will probably sound just a little bit different to this, but this is what I've got so far, so you can see I am actually doing some work. So this is an extract from quite far in the story, in which Cybele, James and Asalia are travelling to the Guild Sun sector on business, and things go horribly, horribly wrong. So just a word of warning as well, this scene contains quite a bit of strong language, largely because if you're getting attacked, you are probably going to swear. So this is from chapter 9, which is called Pursuit. I quickly readied myself to go out, stuffing the vial and the papers we'd picked up from the necromancer into my purse, despite that neither Emmett nor myself were able to decipher the rushed scribbles, and they were more or less useless. I threw on my cloak, hat and gloves and hurried downstairs to meet James. I heard raised voices and a couple of thuds from the training room as I walked to the main staircase, and concluded that Evangeline had finally caught up with her brother for that promised beating. "Ready?" James asked as I stepped into the hall, linking his arm with mine. "When you are," I replied, giving him a kiss on the cheek for being such a gentleman. Just as he was about to open the door, Lena came running into the hall, a defeated-looking Asalia in her wake. "Si, James," she called, and skidded to a halt 2 paces further than where she seemingly intended. She stepped back into view with her innocent smile across her face. "I'm glad I caught you. Would you mind me tagging along? The same 4 walls are driving me crazy." James and I exchanged glances, and Asalia shrugged as if to say, there was no stopping her. I hesitated for a moment, wondering how to put this delicately. "I think it's best if you stay here," I suggested. "We needn't make a big old fuss." Lena's face fell. "I want to help, all right," she insisted. "My mind is far too plagued thanks to this entire conundrum we've unleashed." I shook my head. "Really, it's not a good idea." I side-glanced at James and sighed. "Lynn, I don't know if we'll have to talk to Alexander while we're there, and the less of us and the more experienced the better. He's more than slightly unpredictable." "You mean the loony vampire? The one who's proper off his rocker?" Lena raised one eyebrow at us. "He can't be that dangerous, I mean, nothing we can't handle." "Still, he is, as you say, off his rocker. Best not to give him too many targets. And James and I have dealt with him before," I explained. Her expression didn't show any signs of shifting, but at last she sighed. "I know you mean well, sis, but I can handle myself. You treat me like such a fragile thing." "We just don't want any needless fights on our hands, Lena," James explained, attempting to come to my rescue. "I'm sure Emmett must have a stack of jobs lined up in the study if you're so desperate to get out, and I'm sure plenty of the others would welcome one too." She rolled her eyes but did not persist any further. "All right," she said, sounding a little disappointed. "I'll see you later. Say hello to Alex for me." Asalia stepped around her as she swept off disgruntled, and picked up a hat and cloak from the hooks. "I've set up the carriage for you. It's much less troublesome than catching a cab at this hour, and Josephine could do with some exercise." She smiled. "Not to mention some fresh air sounds great right now." "Thank you, Asalia," I replied. "But where do you expect to find fresh air in London?" She laughed, putting the top hat on her head at an angle. Part of me was sure it wasn't even hers. "You know what I mean." With that, the 3 of us stepped out into the night. The Guild Sun sector was located in slightly more sophisticated areas nearer Hyde Park, which meant a decent carriage journey across London if one preferred not to draw too much attention to oneself. We'd set off from the Guild on Fleet Street as normal, the street seeming no more animated or suspicious than usual. There were people out, of course. This city did never truly rest, but mostly the predictable suspects. Staggering drunks, the more endearing of the prostitutes, and the occasional genteel vampire going about his business nobody dared question. James and I sat in the carriage, instinctively scanning the scenery, though it looked perfectly clear. At last I slumped back into my seat, despite my corset's dig of protest. "All of this smells off," James grumbled, sitting back in his seat and looking at me. "Marcus's claim, Lowell's protection mark, this bloody vial." I leaned forward and clasped his hand in mine. "I know it's stressful," I reassured him as he squeezed my hand back, "but we're in a position where our hands are tied. Until we gain more knowledge, there's little we can do." He shook his head. "I hope that knowledge comes soon, because I think we've all learned a lesson or two about trying to ignore a suspicious case." At this, he glanced at my shoulder where my scar was hidden beneath my dress. I was about to reply, but suddenly Azalea's voice could be heard outside. "What in the name of sanity is that?" Just as we were about to check to see what was going on, a big black shape eclipsed one of the side windows, and the carriage jolted violently, sending both of us sprawling and Azalea cursing. Something had rammed us, and hard. "Cybele," James started to say, but I cut him off. "I'm fine," I replied quickly, my attention snapping to the side of the carriage. The shape had backed off a little, but I could hear scraping and thumping at the wall. I leaned over and threw open the carriage door, to find that I had smashed the window right into the face of a figure, dressed head to foot in black. His grip weakened from my hit and fell off, rolling down the cobbled road behind us. A vampire. I'd been lucky to be able to take him down with the wooden door. I couldn't catch a glimpse of his face as it was obscured by a mask and hood. I hastily shut the door, to find that James had been watching the back window. "We're definitely being pursued," he observed. "2 carriages, no idea who or where from." "Yes, I saw that," I replied. "Our hitchhiker was a vampire, clear as day, but no identification." "Si, James," Azalea called from outside. "Hang in there, I'm going to try to outrun them." The carriage began to quicken, the scenery outside becoming a blur. For a moment it looked as if we were leaving the black carriages behind us. But they sped up too. Azalea turned a sharp corner. Josephine's hooves clattered loudly on the cobblestones, but they still followed us. A couple more corners and Azalea began to curse. We weren't losing them. "What in Goddess's name do they want?" she shouted, frustrated. "I don't know, but I don't plan on finding out," I called back, watching the black back window carefully. One carriage came up beside us again, and I reached for my revolvers hidden in the bustle of my dress. James had taken out that preposterous gun contraption of Emma's that he'd become so recently fond of. Azalea rammed back this time. Our carriage gave another great jolt, and the other one disappeared into the distance behind us, turned up on its side. One of the horses had escaped and was retreating fast, while the other struggled in its harness, still attached to the carriage. The driver was sprawled on the cobblestones and moving, and there was no sign of his hooded passengers. That last thing was particularly unnerving. "One down," James said, sounding a little easier now. One of the carriages was gone, but he stared at the back window cautiously, as the shadow of the other carriage approached. "One to go," he muttered. "I'm going up," I decided, opening the door. "Better range. Could you lend a hand?" James nodded in agreement and gave me a leg up. I lifted my skirts and climbed to the top of the carriage. It seemed that our pursuers had the same idea. 2 figures were stood upon the roof of their own carriage, both hooded like the other had been. "Lovely view up here, don't you think?" Azalea called back. She removed one hand from the reins and reached under the seat for the Bennett's emergency rifle. "Get the driver," she instructed. "No driver, no control." She turned and started shooting. She wasn't aiming, she was simply using the shots to disorientate them, while I got a clear shot with one of my revolvers, putting a bullet straight through the driver's head. Unfortunately, they had some very well-trained or dim horses, because this didn't make the slightest bit of difference. More figures climbed to the roof. "James, your services are required," I called, shooting again, hitting one in the shoulder. It looked as if some of our pursuers were vampire, but we were at the disadvantage of not knowing what kind of bullets to shoot the rest with. I hadn't had the forethought to bring any that were both wood and silver cores. James climbed up to join us as a Salyer turned another sharp corner, the carriage skidding by on two wheels, as we hung onto the rails with one hand. "That one is a wolf," he called, pointing at the closest of the figures. "He's close enough to smell it." I nodded in agreement and sent a silver bullet after the figure. It fell backwards over the edge. One of them shot back and I pulled James towards me by the arm, but the silver bullet skimmed his shoulder. He was tough. He could take it, but I still gave him a worried glance. "I'm fine," he said quickly with a slight wince, and pointed to the one who had shot. "Vampire." I shot again using the revolver loaded with vampire bullets. We were thinning the enemies down slowly, but it was too slow for my liking. Suddenly a flash of blinding green light was heading towards us. I felt a sharp pain as if I'd been hit over the head by a blunt object, but by habit I didn't cry out. The light dimmed and James cursed, holding a large gash in his side and grimacing. "Fucking wizard," he said, between other obscenities he wouldn't usually allow himself to utter. You need to take him down. I can't do it." I mustered up any magic I could, although neither my witch nor my wizard side was particularly dominant that day, and it had been years since I cared to learn any physical magic. However, I was still able to toss a simple but decent-sized immobilizing spell at the wizard, sending him sprawling back. I noticed that not all of them were carrying guns. Some had close-range weapons like knives, which could only mean they intended to board us. That wasn't good. I kept one eye on the pursuers. The wizard was down and only 2 guns and 2 knives remained. 2 were vampires. "James," I said urgently. Magic like that wouldn't do any serious damage to a hybrid of his strength, but it didn't mean it wouldn't hurt like hell on a direct hit. "Nice shot," he said, with a smile that seemed just a little bit forced. "I'm fine, it just skimmed me." "Sigh, you're bleeding." I reached up to touch where the pain was in my head, with the back of my hand. He was right, there was blood. I didn't have time to think about it now, though. "It's just a scratch, I'll heal," I said, and dodged a bullet sailing past as it skimmed my shoulder. "Oh, for goodness sake, I like this dress."